The leather seats of Diane Marshall's Mercedes felt too cold against her back, despite the warm September afternoon. She'd spent the morning at the farmer's market selecting organic ingredients for Rob's favorite lunch, grilled salmon with lemon dill sauce, just the way he liked it. 32 years of marriage had taught her all his preferences, every detail that made him smile. The security gate at Marshall Tech Solutions loomed ahead, familiar as her own reflection. She'd visited these grounds hundreds of times over the decades, watching Rob's company grow from a 3-person startup in a rented office to this sprawling campus of glass and steel. This was his kingdom, built on brilliance and relentless determination, and, though he rarely said it anymore, on her unwavering support. The young security guard, Michael, according to his name tag, smiled warmly as she pulled up. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Marshall. Mr. Marshall isn't expecting you today, is he?" "Surprise visit," Diane said, returning his smile with practiced grace. "I brought lunch." Michael's expression shifted subtly, something flickering across his features that made her stomach tighten. He glanced toward the glass directory board beside his booth, then back at her face, and that flicker became something else entirely. Discomfort. Pity. "Mrs. Marshall, He trailed off, his Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed hard. "Is something wrong?" Diane's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, her wedding ring, a simple platinum band Rob had slipped on her finger when they were both too young and too broke to know better, catching the afternoon light. "No, ma'am, Michael's hand trembled slightly as he pointed toward the directory. "There's been some changes to the executive listings. I thought maybe you'd want to see before you went up." Diane's heart began a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She shifted the car into park and stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement as she approached the illuminated board. Her eyes found the top line automatically, muscle memory from 3 decades of visits. Executive Leadership, Robert Marshall and Patricia Marshall, Co-Chief Executive Officers. The words swam before her eyes. She read them again, then again. Patricia Marshall, Co-CEO. The lunch container slipped from her fingers, salmon and carefully prepared vegetables scattering across the pristine pavement. "Mrs. Marshall, I'm so sorry," Michael was saying, his young face creased with genuine distress. "I assumed you knew. The announcement went out last week to all staff and they updated the systems, but I thought..." "He didn't tell me." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. "He didn't mention getting divorced. Her husband of 32 years, the man who'd promised her forever when they were barely more than children themselves, hadn't thought to inform her that there was now another woman sharing his name, sharing his title, sharing his life. The wedding ring on her finger suddenly felt like it was burning, the weight of it wrong, foreign, a lie made of platinum and 32 years of promises. "Ma'am, I don't think..." Michael started, but Diane was already moving, striding back to her car with her spine straight and her head high. She'd perfected that walk over decades of charity galas and corporate functions, the ability to project absolute composure even when her world was crumbling. The Marshall name commanded respect, and she wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. Not here, not yet. "Open the gate, Michael." "Mrs. Marshall, maybe you should call first. Open the gate." Her voice cracked like a whip, sharp and commanding in a way she rarely allowed herself. The young man flinched, then quickly complied, the barrier rising to let her through. Diane's hands shook on the steering wheel as she navigated the familiar path through the corporate campus. This morning felt like a lifetime ago now. She'd woken at 6, as always, to make Rob's coffee exactly how he preferred it. Dark roast, 2 sugars, a splash of cream. He'd kissed her forehead absently before heading out the door, muttering something about merger complications and late meetings all week. Merger complications. The laugh that escaped her throat sounded unhinged even to her own ears. She'd met Robert Marshall when she was 24, and stupid with optimism, fresh out of graduate school with a master's in nonprofit management and stars in her eyes. He'd been 26, brilliant and driven, with a business plan that would either make him millions or bankrupt him trying. She'd believed in him when no one else did, not even his own family. They'd married after 8 months of whirlwind courtship against everyone's advice. Her mother had worried Rob was too ambitious, too hungry for success. His parents had worried she was too soft, too idealistic to survive in his world of cutthroat business deals. Everyone had worried they were too young, too different, too everything. They'd proven them all wrong. Or so Diane had thought. She'd been working at a women's shelter then, running programs for domestic violence survivors, feeling like she was making a real difference in the world. But when Rob's startup began demanding 80-hour weeks and the stress started affecting his health, she'd made a choice. Their choice, she'd believed at the time. She'd stepped back from her career to manage their home life, to be his anchor and support system, to free him to build his empire. Just for a year or two, he'd promised. Once we're stable, you can go back to your work. I know how much it means to you. A year or two had become 32. The startup had become a multinational corporation. The tiny apartment had become a mansion in Connecticut's most exclusive neighborhood. And Diane's career had become a ghost of what might have been. Volunteer work, charity boards, fundraising galas where she smiled and wore beautiful dresses and pretended she didn't sometimes wonder who she might have become if she'd chosen differently. But she'd never regretted it. Not really. Because they were partners. Because they were building a life together. Because Rob would look at her across a crowded room and mouth, "I love you," and she'd remember why she'd chosen this path. Except now there was Patricia Marshall on the directory board, and Diane couldn't remember the last time Rob had looked at her like that at all. The executive parking garage was nearly empty on a Friday afternoon. Most of the staff left early for the weekend, but Rob's reserved space, closest to the elevator marked with a brass plaque, held his vintage Porsche. And beside it, in the space that had always been left empty for visitors, sat a cherry-red BMW convertible with a vanity plate that read, Patty M. Diane's vision blurred. She parked haphazardly across two spaces, no longer caring about the precision and courtesy she'd maintained her entire adult life. The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless, her reflection in the mirrored walls showing a 58-year-old woman in a cream cashmere sweater and pearls, her hair elegantly styled with those natural silver streaks she'd finally stopped coloring out 2 years ago because Rob had said they made her look distinguished. Had that been when it started? When she'd stopped trying to look young, stopped fighting nature, stopped pretending she was still the 24-year-old girl he'd fallen in love with? The doors opened onto the executive floor, and Diane was immediately struck by the silence. Staff members who would normally greet her warmly now averted their eyes, busying themselves with suddenly urgent tasks. Whispers followed her like a wake as she strode past, her heels clicking an angry rhythm on the marble floors. Vivian, Rob's executive assistant for the past 15 years, rose from her desk as Diane approached. The older woman's face was drawn with guilt, her eyes red-rimmed as if she'd been crying. "Mrs. Marshall," Vivian said softly, reaching out a hand. "I tried to tell him. I begged him to talk to you first, before the announcement, before any of this. I told him it was wrong, that you deserved to—" "Is he in there?" Diane's voice cut through Vivian's explanation like ice. Vivian nodded miserably. "With her. They're reviewing the quarterly reports." Diane didn't knock. That was the first tradition she broke, the first rule of their carefully constructed life together that she shattered. She simply pushed open the double doors to Rob's corner office and stepped into the room where her marriage was apparently already dead and buried. Robert Marshall stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, his salt and pepper hair catching the afternoon light. He'd always been handsome in that distinguished older man way, aging well despite the stress and long hours. At 60, he could still turn heads at parties, still commanded attention when he entered a room. Beside him stood Patricia Donovan. No, Patricia Marshall, apparently. She was younger, mid-30s if Diane had to guess, with that polished corporate femininity that came from expensive salons and personal trainers. Blonde, beautiful, ambitious. Everything Diane used to be before time and sacrifice and 3 decades of putting someone else first had worn those edges smooth. They were standing close, Patricia's hand on Rob's arm as she pointed to something on a tablet. Not touching inappropriately, perhaps, but with an easy familiarity that made Diane's chest constrict. This was intimacy of a different kind, the casual closeness of people who spent their days together, who shared goals and victories, who were building something as partners, the way Diane and Rob used to be before she became just the wife at home. "Hello, Robert." Her voice emerged steady, controlled, revealing none of the hurricane raging beneath her surface. I see congratulations are in order. A new co-CEO. You must be so proud. Rob spun around and the color drained from his face like water from a tub. Diane, God, you weren't supposed to… What? Find out? She stepped fully into the office, her eyes never leaving his face. Were you planning to tell me eventually, or was I meant to read about my husband's new business partner in the Wall Street Journal? It's not like that, Rob started, but Patricia stepped forward, a small smile playing at her lips. Mrs. Marshall, I've heard so much about you. Rob speaks very highly of your charitable work. The younger woman extended a manicured hand. I'm Patricia. I've been with Marshall Tech for 3 years now, VP of Operations until last week's restructuring. Diane looked at the offered hand as if it were a snake. Marshall Tech Solutions, emphasis on Marshall. Her eyes shifted to Rob. Tell me, darling, when exactly did you marry this woman? Was I at the wedding, or did that slip your mind to mention too? Jesus, Diane, she's not… Rob ran his fingers through his hair, a nervous gesture she'd seen 1,000 times. It's complicated. Complicated? Diane laughed, a sound sharp enough to cut glass. 32 years of marriage, 2 children, building an empire together from nothing. That was simple. But apparently, this is complicated. Patricia's smile faltered. She glanced at Rob, something passing between them that made Diane's hands curl into fists at her sides. Perhaps I should give you two some privacy. No, Diane's voice cracked like a whip. You're apparently family now, Patricia Marshall. You should hear this. She's not Marshall, Rob said quickly. That's what I've been trying to tell you. It's a corporate structure thing, a branding decision for the company transition. You put her name on the directory board. Diane's composure finally cracked, her voice rising. You gave her our name, Rob, the name I've carried for 32 years. The name I gave our children, the name I've built a reputation on through every charity board and every corporate function where I stood beside you and smiled and played the perfect wife. Diane, please. While you apparently decided I wasn't enough anymore. The words tore from her throat, raw and aching. What was it, Rob? The gray hair? The laugh lines? The fact that I'm not some ambitious 30-something climbing the corporate ladder? Tell me, when did I stop being worthy of the truth? The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia had gone pale, clearly not expecting this level of confrontation. Rob's face was stricken, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled for words. It's not about you, he finally said, the oldest lie in the book. Then what is it about? Diane demanded. Help me understand how you could spend 32 years building a life with me. Let me sacrifice my career for yours. Let me fade into the background while you shined, and then not even have the basic respect to tell me you were putting another woman in my place. You're not being replaced, Rob said desperately. Patricia is a colleague, nothing more. The name thing, it was a marketing decision, a way to signal to shareholders that the company is expanding leadership. It means nothing. It means everything, Diane's voice broke. Don't you see that? Every employee in this building saw that directory before I did. Every client, every shareholder, everyone in your professional life knew about this change before your own wife. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Rob moved toward her, hands outstretched. I'm sorry. God, Diane, I'm so sorry. I meant to tell you, there was never a right time. And the business demands have been insane, and I thought… You thought what? That I wouldn't notice? That I'd just accept it? She stepped back, keeping distance between them. Or did you hope I'd do what I've always done? Smile and support you and pretend this doesn't hurt? I never meant to hurt you. His voice cracked, and for the first time since she'd entered the office, Diane saw genuine emotion cross his face. Fear, desperation, regret. But was it regret for what he'd done, or just regret that he'd been caught? Mrs. Marshall, Patricia said quietly, and there was actually sympathy in her voice now, which somehow made it worse. For what it's worth, there's nothing inappropriate between Robert and me. We're business partners. That's all. Diane turned to look at the younger woman, really look at her. Patricia was polished and professional, yes, but there was also something genuine in her expression. This wasn't the face of someone who'd deliberately stolen another woman's husband. This was someone caught in a situation she probably hadn't fully understood the implications of, which somehow made it all worse, because it meant Rob had done this entirely on his own. He'd made these choices, these decisions that affected Diane's entire life without considering her at all. "Did he tell you about me?" Diane asked quietly. "When he proposed this partnership, this shared name, did he mention he had a wife at home who might have some thoughts on the matter?" Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "He said you were very supportive of his business decisions, that you trusted his judgment." Diane laughed bitterly. How convenient for him. She turned back to Rob, and the man she'd loved for over 3 decades suddenly looked like a stranger. "I've supported every decision you've ever made. Every late night, every missed dinner, every school play and soccer game and dance recital I attended alone while you built your empire. I never once complained, never once asked you to choose between me and your ambitions." "I know," Rob said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know what you've given up for me." "Do you?" Diane's vision blurred with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall, not here, not in front of him. "Because from where I'm standing it looks like you've forgotten entirely. Or maybe you just stopped caring." Rob's face crumpled. He moved toward her again, and this time she didn't step back. He reached for her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers, and the familiar warmth of his touch nearly broke her resolve. "I haven't stopped caring," he said desperately. "God, Diane, I love you. I've always loved you. This thing with Patricia, it's not what you think. It's business, that's all. I got caught up in the optics, in what the board wanted, in trying to position the company for the next generation of leadership. I was stupid and thoughtless, but I swear to you, on our children's lives, there's nothing romantic between us." Diane looked down at their joined hands, his large and still strong, hers adorned with the rings he'd given her across 3 decades. The engagement ring he'd saved 3 months for when they were 20-something kids playing at being adults. The wedding band from their simple ceremony in her parents' backyard. The anniversary band from their 10th year, diamonds he'd finally been able to afford. The eternity ring from their 25th, when he'd renewed their vows and promised her forever all over again. So many promises, so many years of believing in them. "You're right," she said softly, pulling her hand from his grasp. "You were stupid and thoughtless. And you know what the worst part is, Rob? It's not even the name thing, not really. It's that you didn't think of me at all. In all those board meetings and marketing discussions and strategic planning sessions, it never once occurred to you that your wife of 32 years might want to be consulted before another woman started sharing your public identity." "Diane, I'm not finished." Her voice was steady now, cold and clear. "For 32 years, I've been the woman behind your success, the gracious hostess at your parties, the supportive wife in your press photos, the understanding partner when you missed our anniversary for a business trip to Tokyo. I played my role perfectly, Rob. I never complained, never demanded more than you could give. And this is how you repay that devotion? By erasing me so gradually, I didn't even notice until I was already gone?" "You're not erased," Rob said desperately. "You're my wife. You're the mother of my children. I'm what? The woman you come home to after you've spent all day building an empire with her?" Diane gestured toward Patricia, who looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "Tell me, Rob, when was the last time we talked about anything meaningful? When did you last ask me about my day, my thoughts, my dreams? When did I become just furniture in your life? Reliable, comfortable, easy to overlook?" The silence that stretched between them was answer enough. Diane took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I'm leaving now. I'm going to walk out of this office with my dignity intact, and I'm going to figure out what comes next. What you do with your new business partner is your concern. But understand this. I will not be the understanding wife who pretends this doesn't matter. Not this time." "Wait." Rob moved to block her path, his face desperate. "Please, just wait. Let me explain everything. Let me make this right." "How?" Diane asked simply. "How do you make this right, Rob? How do you take back weeks or months of meetings where you planned this partnership without once thinking I deserved to know? How do you undo the fact that every employee in this building pitied me when I walked past them today? How do you restore 32 years of trust you've casually shattered because you couldn't be bothered to have a difficult conversation with your wife? Rob's eyes filled with tears, and seeing him cry, something she'd witnessed maybe 5 times in 3 decades, almost broke her. Almost. I don't know, he admitted, his voice raw. But I'll do anything. Anything, Diane. I can't lose you. You should have thought of that before you made me feel like I'd already lost you. She stepped around him, moving toward the door. Then she paused, turning back one last time. And Rob? For what it's worth, I hope Patricia is worth it. I hope whatever you were trying to prove by bringing in a younger, ambitious partner who doesn't remind you that you're getting older. I hope it was worth sacrificing the one person who loved you before the money and the success and the empire. Because that's what you've just thrown away. She walked out without looking back, past Patricia's stricken face, past Vivian's tear-filled eyes, past the gauntlet of employees who now couldn't pretend they weren't watching the Marshall marriage implode in real time. The elevator doors closed on a reflection, a woman still standing straight, despite the cracked spiderwebbing through her composure. She made it to the parking garage, made it to her car, even made it out through the security gate, where Michael waved her through with obvious relief that she wasn't breaking down on his watch. She drove 4 blocks before pulling into an empty parking lot behind a shopping center, parking between a dumpster and a delivery truck where no one could see her. Only then did she let the sobs come, harsh and ugly and cleansing. 32 years, 2 children, a lifetime of choices made and sacrifices given, and love poured out without measure. And for what? Her phone buzzed, then buzzed again. Rob calling, Rob texting. She turned it face down on the passenger seat, unable to look at his name lighting up the screen. After what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, Diane pulled herself together enough to drive again. She needed her children, needed to talk to someone who would understand the magnitude of what had just happened. Marcus's architecture firm was downtown, a trendy converted warehouse space that reflected her son's creative sensibilities. At 30 years old, he'd inherited his father's drive and his mother's compassion, the best of both of them. She'd always thought so anyway. The receptionist recognized her immediately, waving her through with a smile that faltered when she saw Diane's face. Marcus emerged from his office seconds later, his expression shifting from pleasure at her unexpected visit to alarm in the space of a heartbeat. "Mom, what happened?" He crossed the open workspace in long strides, taking her hands in his. "You're shaking. Is there somewhere we can talk privately?" Marcus led her to his office, closing the door behind them. The moment he did, the story spilled out. The directory, the confrontation, Patricia, everything. Her son's face darkened with each detail, his jaw clenching in a way that reminded her painfully of Rob when he was angry. "That son of a bitch!" Marcus hissed when she finished. "I'm going to kill him." "Marcus, no, Mom, seriously. What the hell was he thinking? How could he do this to you, after everything you've given up for him?" Her son began pacing, running his hands through his hair, another gesture inherited from his father. "I knew something was off lately. He's been weird at family dinners, distracted. But I never thought—" "Call your sister," Diane said tiredly. "She needs to hear this from me before it becomes office gossip or shows up in some business publication." Lydia answered on the first ring, and Diane could hear the pediatrics ward chaos in the background. "Mom, is everything okay? I'm in the middle of— Your father and I are having some problems." Diane kept her voice level, clinical, as if she were discussing someone else's marriage. "I need you to know before you hear it somewhere else." "What? What kind of problems?" Lydia's voice sharpened with concern. Diane repeated the story, exhaustion bleeding into every word. By the end, Lydia was crying, and Marcus had his arm around his mother's shoulders, his earlier rage replaced by protective tenderness. "I'm coming over," Lydia said immediately. "I'm leaving my shift. I'm coming right now." "Don't," Diane said firmly. "You have patients who need you. I'm fine. I just needed you both to know. Your father and I need to figure out what happens next. But whatever that is, it's between us. I don't want you two caught in the middle." "Too late for that," Marcus said grimly. "He's not getting away with treating you like this. I don't care if he's my father." Diane touched her son's face, this beautiful man she'd raised to be better than this moment. I need you to remember that whatever happens between your father and me, we both love you and Lydia more than anything. This isn't about you. It's about us, and choices we've made and things that broke somewhere along the way. He broke them, Marcus said fiercely. You've done nothing wrong. But that was the thing, wasn't it? Diane had done nothing. For years she'd done nothing to push back when Rob's work consumed him, nothing to demand more from their relationship, nothing to insist on maintaining her own identity beyond being Mrs. Robert Marshall, devoted wife and mother. She'd let herself fade into the background of her own life, and now she was shocked to discover no one had noticed she was disappearing. I need some time, she told her children. Time to think, to figure out what I want, who I am beyond being your father's wife. Can you understand that? They could, though neither was happy about it. Lydia made Diane promise to call if she needed anything at all. Marcus offered to let her stay in his guest room. So you don't have to see him if you don't want to. She declined both, needing to face her own home and her own life without the buffer of her children's protection. The drive back to Connecticut felt longer than usual. Their house, a sprawling colonial on 3 acres of meticulously landscaped property, looked like something from a magazine. Beautiful, perfect, empty. Rob's car wasn't in the driveway, which was both a relief and a disappointment. Part of her wanted to keep fighting, to demand answers and accountability. But a larger part just wanted to crawl into bed and pretend this day had never happened. She unlocked the door and stepped into the foyer, surrounded by the trappings of their successful life. Photos on the walls chronicled 32 years of family memories, wedding photos, baby pictures, graduations, holidays, a timeline of their love story frozen in silver frames. When had it stopped being real and started being just a performance? The house felt cavernous without Rob's presence. She wandered from room to room, seeing everything with fresh eyes. His office, where he spent hours on late-night calls. The kitchen, where she'd prepared thousands of meals he'd eaten distracted by his phone or laptop. The bedroom they'd shared for 3 decades. The bed they'd made love in and conceived their children in and eventually just slept in, side by side, but somehow miles apart. On Rob's nightstand, she found his forgotten tablet. Without meaning to, she picked it up, waking the screen. Email notifications, text messages, calendar events, and photos. So many photos from the company retreat last month, the one she hadn't attended because Rob said it was mostly boring strategy sessions. Photos of the executive team at dinner, laughing. Rob and Patricia standing close at a whiteboard, collaborating. Rob and Patricia at the hotel bar, deep in conversation over cocktails. Nothing overtly romantic. No kissing, no hand-holding, no smoking gun that proved infidelity. But the intimacy was there in every image, in the way they leaned toward each other, in the smiles they shared, in the body language that spoke of connection and understanding. This was what she'd lost somewhere along the way. Not grand gestures or passionate affairs, just mattering, being seen, being essential to someone's daily life beyond just managing the household and maintaining the perfect image. Diane set the tablet down and walked to her own closet, pulling out an old box from the top shelf. Inside were pieces of her former life, letters from the women she'd helped at the shelter, a framed certificate from her nonprofit management program, newspaper clippings about community programs she'd started, evidence of a woman who used to change lives, who used to matter beyond being someone's wife and mother. What happened to her? At the bottom of the box, she found a card she'd forgotten about, the funeral program from Sarah Cooper's service 6 months ago. Sarah, who'd been her best friend in high school, who'd married James Cooper, the boy Diane had almost loved before she met Rob. They'd drifted apart over the years, maintaining occasional Christmas card contact and not much else. Diane had attended Sarah's funeral out of respect for their old friendship, had seen James there, older, grayer, devastated by loss. They'd talked briefly at the reception. He'd held her hand and said, "You look exactly like I remembered, like someone who lights up every room she enters." It had been the first time in years that someone had really seen her, not as Rob's wife or Marcus and Lydia's mother, but as herself, as Diane. He'd given her his number, asked her to call sometime. "I'd love to catch up," he'd said. Remember who we used to be before life got so complicated. She'd never called. It felt inappropriate, disrespectful to both Sarah's memory and her marriage to Rob. But now she pulled the card from the box, running her finger over James's handwritten note on the back. Thank you for coming. It meant more than you know. If you ever need a friend, I'm here. James. Her phone rang, making her jump. Not Rob this time, but a number she didn't recognize. She answered cautiously. Mrs. Marshall, this is Vivian, from Mr. Marshall's office. Vivian, Diane's voice came out flat. I'm not sure what more there is to say. I just wanted you to know. He's still here, in his office. He sent Patricia home hours ago, and he's just sitting there, staring at your wedding photo, the one he keeps on his desk. Vivian's voice cracked. I've worked for him for 15 years, and I've never seen him like this. He's terrified he's lost you. He should be, Diane said, but without heat, just exhaustion. I know, you're right. Vivian took a shaky breath. I thought you should know. He's not the villain in this, not really. He's just a stupid man who forgot to appreciate what he had until it was too late. That doesn't excuse it, but maybe it explains it. After Vivian hung up, Diane sat in her closet, surrounded by memories and possibilities. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from Rob, a dozen text messages begging her to come back, to talk, to let him explain. She didn't respond to any of them. Instead, she pulled out James Cooper's card and looked at his number for a long time. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she dialed. He answered on the third ring, his voice warm and slightly confused. Hello? James? It's Diane Marshall. We talked at Sarah's funeral. Diane. She could hear the smile in his voice, the genuine pleasure. Of course I remember. How are you? And there it was, the question Rob hadn't asked her in months. How are you? Not how's your day, not what's for dinner, not the casual pleasantries of people coexisting in the same space. But how are you? With actual interest in the answer. I'm not sure, she admitted, surprising herself with honesty. It's been a complicated day. Do you want to talk about it? Did she? Did she want to spill her marital problems to a man she hadn't spoken to in 6 months, who'd only recently buried his own wife? It seemed selfish, inappropriate. But then again, her entire life had been about doing what seemed appropriate, about being the good wife, the supportive partner, the woman who never made waves or demanded more than she was freely given. Maybe it was time to be selfish. Maybe it was time to remember who Diane Marshall was before she became Mrs. Robert Marshall and lost herself entirely. Actually, she said slowly, I'd really like that. Are you free this weekend? What would you do? Would you give your husband of 32 years another chance, or would you risk everything to rediscover who you are? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 2. The drive to James Cooper's lake house took 3 hours, but Diane barely noticed the passing miles. She'd left Friday morning before Rob came home, if he'd come home at all. His texts had continued through the night, evolving from desperate apologies to angry demands to know where she was, finally settling into worried pleas for her safety. She'd sent one message. I'm fine. I need space. Don't follow me. Marcus had called twice, Lydia 3 times. She'd assured them both she was safe, just taking time to think. Neither had been happy about her mysterious weekend plans, but they'd reluctantly respected her need for privacy. The lake house appeared around a bend in the road, exactly as James had described it, a sprawling cedar and glass structure nestled among towering pines, with a dock stretching into crystal blue water. It was beautiful in an understated way, nothing like the ostentatious mansion she shared with Rob. This place felt peaceful, real. James emerged onto the wraparound porch before she'd even cut the engine, and Diane's breath caught. He'd aged well in the 6 months since Sarah's funeral, maybe even better than well. His silver hair caught the afternoon light, and despite being 62, he moved with an easy athleticism that spoke of someone who actually enjoyed life rather than just surviving it. You made it, he said, opening her car door with old-fashioned courtesy Rob had stopped bothering with years ago. I was starting to worry you'd changed your mind. I almost did. Diane accepted his offered hand, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. About a dozen times during the drive. James's smile was gentle, understanding. I'm glad you didn't. Come on, I'll give you the tour, then we can talk. Or not talk, whatever you need. The interior of the lake house was even more impressive than the exterior, all warm wood and floor-to-ceiling windows that brought the outside in. The furniture was comfortable rather than designer, lived in rather than pristine. Photos covered one entire wall, chronicling James and Sarah's 35 years together. Diane recognized some of them. The wedding photo where Sarah glowed with happiness, vacation snapshots, grandchildren she hadn't known existed. 4 grandkids, James said, following her gaze. My daughter has 3, my son 1. They're the joy of my life, especially since... He trailed off, grief flickering across his features. I'm sorry, Diane said softly. Sarah was wonderful. You two seemed so happy. We were. James moved to pour them both wine from a bottle already breathing on the counter. Most of the time anyway. Marriage is complicated, isn't it? Even the good ones. Diane accepted the glass, letting the question hang in the air as James led her out to the deck. The view was spectacular. Water stretching to the horizon, mountains rising in the distance, sunset beginning to paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. This is where I come to remember who I am, James said quietly, settling into one of the Adirondack chairs and gesturing for her to take the other. When the house in the city gets too quiet, when the memories get too loud, up here I can just be. Diane sank into the chair beside him, the tension she'd been carrying for days finally beginning to ease. I don't know who I am anymore. Isn't that pathetic? 58 years old, and I have no idea what I want or who I am beyond being someone's wife and someone's mother. It's not pathetic, James said firmly. It's honest. And honestly, I spent the last decade of my marriage feeling invisible. Sarah was amazing, brilliant surgeon, dedicated mother, tireless volunteer. But somewhere along the way, we became roommates who occasionally had sex rather than partners who actually saw each other. The blunt honesty startled a laugh from Diane. That's exactly what happened to us, except we stopped with the occasionally having sex part about 2 years ago. James winced sympathetically. Ouch. Right? Diane took a long sip of wine, the alcohol warming her from the inside. I kept telling myself it was normal, that couples our age naturally became less physical. But the truth is, Rob stopped seeing me as a woman. I became, I don't know, the household manager, the social coordinator, the person who made sure his life ran smoothly while he built his empire. Do you want to tell me what happened? James asked gently. The phone call made it sound pretty dramatic. So Diane told him. All of it. The directory board, Patricia Marshall, the confrontation, the realization that she'd become furniture in her own marriage. James listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each detail. That son of a bitch, he said when she finished, echoing Marcus's words. Diane, you deserved so much better than that. Did I? The question surprised her even as she asked it. I let it happen, James. I let myself fade into the background. I stopped fighting for my own dreams, my own identity. Maybe I got exactly what I deserved. No. James's voice was sharp enough to make her look at him. Don't you dare blame yourself for his selfishness. You made sacrifices for your family, for his career. That's not weakness. That's love. The fact that he couldn't appreciate it, couldn't see what he was losing, that's on him, not you. Diane's eyes filled with tears. I just feel so stupid. 32 years, James. How did I not see this coming? Because you trusted him. James reached over, taking her hand in his. The touch was electric, sending warmth up her arm that had nothing to do with the wine. Because you believed in your vows and your partnership. There's no shame in that. They sat in silence as the sun continued its descent, hands loosely joined, the water lapping gently against the dock. This simple moment, being seen, being heard, being valued, was more intimate than anything Diane had experienced with Rob in years. I thought about you, James said quietly. After the funeral, after you left. I kept remembering that girl you were in high school, so passionate about changing the world, so sure you could make a difference. I wondered if you'd managed it, if you'd found what you were looking for." Diane laughed bitterly. "I found exactly what I thought I wanted. The husband, the family, the beautiful house. And I lost myself completely in the process. Then maybe it's time to find yourself again." James squeezed her hand gently. "You're not dead, Diane. Your marriage might be, but you're very much alive. And from where I'm sitting, you're still that passionate woman who wanted to change the world. You just forgot for a while." Something cracked open in Diane's chest at those words, a possibility she'd been too afraid to consider, that this wasn't an ending, that maybe, just maybe, it could be a beginning. "Stay," James said, his voice low and intense. "Stay the weekend. Let me remind you who you are. No pressure, no expectations, just two old friends remembering what it feels like to be seen." Diane should have said no, should have driven back to Connecticut, confronted Rob properly, made rational decisions about her marriage, but rationality had gotten her 32 years of slow suffocation. Maybe it was time to do something completely irrational. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll stay." James's smile was radiant, transforming his face from handsome to devastating. "Good. Now, let's get you settled, and then I'm making you dinner. I've gotten pretty good at cooking since Sarah died. Turns out I actually enjoy it when I'm not just reheating takeout alone." The guest room he showed her to was lovely. A queen bed with a view of the lake, an ensuite bathroom, everything she could need. But what struck her most was the care James had taken. Fresh flowers on the nightstand, fluffy towels and luxury toiletries in the bathroom, a stack of books on the dresser, contemporary women's fiction, memoirs, exactly the kind of thing she loved but rarely had time to read. "How did you know?" she asked, touching the books with wonder. James shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "I remembered you always had a book in your backpack in high school. Figured you probably still loved to read." That he'd remembered such a small detail after 40 years made Diane's throat tight with emotion. When was the last time Rob had remembered anything about her preferences beyond how she took her coffee? Dinner was a revelation. James had prepared salmon. "I hope that's okay. I know it's Friday. And I wasn't sure if you still observed anything," with roasted vegetables and wild rice. They ate on the deck as the last light faded from the sky, conversation flowing easily between them. He told her about his life since Sarah's death. The loneliness, yes, but also the unexpected freedom. "I loved her," he said simply. "But toward the end, we were just going through the motions. She had her surgeries, her hospital politics, her charity boards. I had my law practice, my golf buddies, my routine. We'd have dinner twice a week, sex once a month if I was lucky, and call it a marriage." "That sounds eerily familiar," Diane admitted. "The thing is," James continued, pouring them both more wine, "I don't think either of us was wrong. We just grew apart, became different people than we were at 25. And neither of us was brave enough to admit that maybe we'd outgrown each other." "Do you regret it? The marriage, I mean." James considered the question carefully. "No. Sarah gave me 2 wonderful children and 35 years of companionship. But do I regret not being honest with her, with myself, about what was missing, about feeling invisible in my own life?" He met Diane's eyes. "Yeah, I regret that." "What was missing?" Diane asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Passion." James said the word like a confession. Not just sexual passion, though God knows I missed that too. But passion for life, for each other, for something beyond just existing. Sarah was passionate about her work, but she had nothing left for me. And I was too comfortable, too afraid of rocking the boat to demand more. Diane's heart hammered in her chest. "What would you do differently if you could go back?" James leaned forward, his eyes intense in the gathering darkness. "I'd be brave. I'd risk being uncomfortable. I'd choose passion over comfort, even if it meant blowing up the life I'd built." He paused. "What about you? What do you want, Diane? Not what Rob wants, not what your kids need. What do you want?" No one had asked her that question in 32 years. The answer should have been complicated, carefully considered. But it wasn't. "I want to feel alive again," she whispered. "I want to matter. I want to be seen as a woman, not just a wife. I want—" She trailed off, unable to finish. "What?" James prompted gently. I want what I see in your eyes when you look at me. The confession hung between them, raw and terrifying. Like I'm worth seeing, worth knowing, worth choosing. James stood slowly, extending his hand. Dance with me. There's no music. There doesn't need to be. He pulled her to her feet, drawing her close. One hand settled at her waist, the other clasped hers, and they began to sway to a rhythm only they could hear. Diane's head barely reached James's shoulder. She let herself lean into him, breathing in his scent, something woodsy and clean, nothing like Rob's expensive cologne. This close, she could feel his heart beating, steady and strong against her cheek. You are worth seeing, James murmured into her hair. Worth knowing, worth choosing. Rob's a fool for forgetting that. Diane tilted her head back to look at him, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. This was dangerous territory, emotional, physical, everything she'd promised to reserve only for her husband. But her husband had already broken those promises, hadn't he? Not with physical infidelity, perhaps, but with something worse, with neglect, with forgetting she existed beyond her utility to him. James, she started, but he shook his head. I won't be someone's rebound, Diane. I've wanted you too long for that. His voice was rough with emotion. When I saw you at Sarah's funeral looking so beautiful and so sad, it was like being 19 again, remembering what it felt like to look at you across a crowded room and think, there she is, the one who got away. I didn't know, Diane breathed. Back then, I mean. I thought you only had eyes for Sarah. I chose Sarah because I couldn't have you, because you were so clearly in love with Rob, and I wasn't going to be the guy who pined forever. James's hand tightened at her waist. But I never forgot you. And seeing you now, seeing how he's treated you, it makes me want to show you what you should have had all along. Diane's pulse raced. And what's that? Everything. James's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Devotion. Passion. A partner who sees you, really sees you, and chooses you every single day. Someone who makes you feel alive instead of invisible. They'd stopped swaying, standing locked together in the darkness. Diane could feel every point of contact between their bodies, his hand at her waist, her palm against his chest, the heat radiating between them. One of them just needed to be brave enough to close the final distance. I need to feel chosen, Diane admitted, her voice breaking. I need to know I'm more than just what I can do for someone else, that I'm desirable, worthy of being pursued. Does that make me selfish? It makes you human. James's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. And for the record, you're magnificent, Diane Marshall. Every year, every silver streak in your hair, every line that shows you've lived and loved and survived, you're not less than you were at 24. You're more. So much more. Diane's eyes filled with tears. Then why doesn't he see it? Because he's not looking. James leaned closer, his breath warm against her lips. But I am. I see you, Diane. All of you. And I've imagined this moment for 40 years. Imagined what? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. This. And James closed the final distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that sent electricity through every nerve ending in her body. It was nothing like kissing Rob had become, perfunctory, distracted, going through familiar motions. This was discovery and urgency, and years of want finally unleashed. James kissed her like she was precious and necessary and the most important thing in his universe. His hand tangled in her hair, the other pulling her impossibly closer, and Diane heard a sound escape her throat that was half sob, half moan. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, James pressed his forehead to hers. I've wanted to do that since we were 19 years old. We should stop, Diane said, even as her hands fisted in his shirt, holding him close. I'm still married. This is wrong. Is it? James's hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. Your marriage ended the moment Rob put another woman's name next to his, the moment he chose his ego over his partnership with you. This? He gestured between them. This is two people who've been given a second chance at finding what they should have had all along. I'm scared, Diane admitted. I don't know how to do this. I've only been with Rob for 32 years. I don't know how to be with someone else. James smiled, gentle and understanding. We don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We can just kiss, just hold each other, just remember what it feels like to be desired. No pressure, no expectations. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. The kindness in his words, the patience, made Diane's decision for her. She'd spent 32 years putting everyone else's needs first. Maybe it was time to be selfish. Maybe it was time to choose herself. I need you to keep kissing me, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I need to remember what it feels like to be wanted. James's answer was to pull her close again, his mouth finding hers with renewed urgency. They stumbled inside, still kissing, hands exploring with the desperation of people who'd waited far too long. He backed her against the wall near the fireplace, his body pressing against hers, and Diane felt desire, real, urgent, consuming desire, flood through her for the first time in years. Bedroom? James murmured against her lips. Yes. No hesitation, no second guessing. Just yes. James took her hand and led her upstairs, not to the guest room, but to the master suite overlooking the lake. Moonlight streamed through the windows, silvering everything it touched. He turned to face her, suddenly uncertain. We can still stop, he said. If this is too much, too fast. Diane silenced him with a kiss, pouring everything she felt into it. Gratitude, desire, the desperate need to be seen as more than just a wife who'd outlived her usefulness. Her fingers found the buttons of his shirt, fumbling slightly with nervousness and whine and want. James helped her, shrugging out of the shirt and revealing a chest that showed his age but also his care. Still toned from whatever exercise he did, a few scars telling stories she wanted to know. Then his hands found the hem of her sweater, pausing. You're sure? I'm sure. And she was, more sure than she'd been of anything in years. He pulled the sweater over her head, revealing the expensive lingerie she'd put on that morning without quite knowing why. James's sharp intake of breath made her feel powerful, desirable, seen. God, Diane, you're so beautiful. I'm 58, she said, suddenly self-conscious. I have stretch marks from 2 pregnancies, and gravity hasn't been kind, and you're perfect. James's hand spanned her waist, pulling her close. Every mark tells a story. Every year adds wisdom. You're not less than you were. You're more. So much more. He walked her backward to the bed, laying her down with a gentleness that made tears spring to her eyes. Then he was beside her, his hands and mouth exploring with patient thoroughness, learning her body with the attention of someone who actually cared about her pleasure. When was the last time Rob had cared if she'd enjoyed herself? When had sex become just another task to check off, another way she served his needs? But this was different. James touched her like she mattered, like her pleasure was essential, like discovering what made her gasp and arch was the most important thing in the world. Tell me what you like, he murmured against her skin. Show me what you need. The request was revolutionary. Rob had never asked, had assumed he knew after 32 years. But James wanted to learn her, wanted to make this good for her, wanted her to be an active participant rather than a passive recipient. I don't know, Diane admitted, the words catching in her throat. It's been so long since anyone asked. James lifted his head, meeting her eyes. Then let's discover it together. We have all night, all weekend, however long you want to take. And they did. Slowly, tenderly, James mapped her body with hands and mouth, paying attention to what made her breath catch and her fingers tighten in the sheets. He learned that she was sensitive behind her ears, that she liked when he was firm but gentle, that she could actually have orgasms, multiple ones, when someone took the time to focus on her pleasure. When he finally moved over her, positioning himself between her thighs, James paused. I choose you, Diane. Every day from now on, I choose you. I choose you too, she breathed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. I choose me. Then he was pushing inside her, and Diane gasped at the sensation, so familiar and yet completely new. This wasn't the mechanical coupling she'd grown used to. This was connection, passion, 2 people truly present with each other. They moved together, finding a rhythm that felt right, felt natural. James watched her face, adjusting his angle and pace based on her responses, making sure she was with him every step of the way. And when she finally shattered, crying out his name, he followed her over the edge moments later. Afterward, they lay tangled together, both shaking slightly from the intensity. James pulled the covers over them, tucking her against his side with her head on his chest. "I've imagined this for 40 years, he said quietly, pressing a kiss to her hair. But the reality is so much better than any fantasy." Diane traced patterns on his chest, feeling more at peace than she had in years. "I don't know what happens next. I don't know how to navigate any of this. We figure it out together." James tightened his arms around her. "But Diane, whatever you decide about your marriage, about your future, I'm here. I've waited 40 years. I can wait as long as you need. Just know that I see you, I want you, and I'm choosing you. Every single day, I choose you." Diane felt tears slide down her cheeks, but they weren't sad tears. They were relief and gratitude and the overwhelming emotion of finally feeling like she mattered to someone. They made love twice more that night, once in the early hours of morning when Diane woke pressed against James's body and discovered she wanted him again, and once more as dawn broke over the lake, slower and sweeter and full of promise. Sunday morning brought reality crashing back. Diane's phone, which she'd been ignoring all weekend, showed 53 missed calls and twice as many texts, most from Rob, several from Marcus and Lydia, a few from Vivian. "You should probably check those," James said gently, handing her coffee. "I'll give you privacy if you need it." Diane scrolled through the messages, her peace evaporating with each desperate text from Rob. "Please come home. We need to talk. I fired Patricia, reversed everything. Your name is the only one that matters. The kids are worried. I'm worried. I love you. Please don't throw away 32 years. The last one, sent at 3 a.m., made her breath catch. "I see now what I did. I took you for granted. I forgot you were a woman with needs and dreams, not just my support system. I was a fool. Please give me a chance to remember who we used to be." "He wants me back," Diane said quietly, showing James the phone. Something flickered across James's face, fear maybe, or resignation. "Do you want to go back?" That was the question, wasn't it? 32 years of history, 2 children, a life she'd built even if she'd lost herself in the process. Could she really throw all that away for a weekend of passion with a man she barely knew anymore? Except, that wasn't fair. She knew James, or she was beginning to know him again, and what she'd learned was that he saw her as a whole person, not just as someone who made his life easier. He wanted her pleasure, her happiness, her presence, not just her service. "I don't know," Diane admitted. "Part of me thinks I should try, that I owe it to our history, to our children, but another part knows you deserve better," James finished quietly. He set down his coffee and took her hands. "I meant what I said last night. I'll wait. However long you need to figure out what you want, I'll be here. But Diane," his eyes were intense, serious, "don't stay with him out of obligation. Don't sacrifice the rest of your life because you already gave him 32 years. You deserve to be chosen every day by someone who sees how magnificent you are." Diane kissed him, slow and sweet and full of gratitude. "I need to go home, face this properly. But James, this weekend, you made me remember who I was, who I can still be. Thank you." "It's not over," James said fiercely. "This isn't over, Diane. We deserve our chance." The drive home felt simultaneously too long and too short. Diane used the time to think, to really consider what she wanted beyond the fear and obligation and 32 years of conditioning. She thought about Rob's texts, his promises to change. But she'd heard those promises before, after every missed anniversary, every forgotten birthday, every time work came before family. He always meant it in the moment. Nothing ever actually changed. She thought about her children, worried they'd be disappointed in her choice. But Marcus had already told her she deserved happiness, and Lydia, who'd wanted the fairy tale to continue, would hopefully understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let a broken thing die with dignity. Mostly, though, she thought about waking up in James's arms, feeling desired and seen and valuable. Thought about the difference between a man who took and a man who gave. thought about having a partner who actually wanted to discover what made her happy, rather than assuming he already knew. By the time Diane pulled into her driveway and saw Rob's car, and Marcus's car, and Lydia's car, she knew what she had to do. The question was whether she'd be brave enough to do it. Rob met her at the door before she could even get her key in the lock. He looked terrible, unshaven, disheveled, eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep or crying or both. Behind him, Marcus and Lydia hovered in the foyer, their faces tight with worry. "Diane," Rob's voice cracked on her name. "Thank God, we've been so worried. Where were you?" Diane stepped inside, setting her overnight bag down with careful precision. She met Rob's eyes, then Marcus's, then Lydia's. 3 people she loved more than anything. 3 people whose lives were about to change because she'd finally chosen herself. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "All of us. Because I've made a decision and you all deserve to know." Should Diane fight for her marriage or embrace a new love? Drop your thoughts below and hit that subscribe button. Chapter 3. The living room felt like a courtroom, everyone taking their positions with careful deliberation. Rob sat on the couch where they'd spent countless evenings watching television in companionable silence, or at least what Diane had mistaken for companionable silence. Now she recognized it for what it was, 2 people existing in the same space without actually connecting. Marcus stood near the fireplace, arms crossed, protective energy radiating from every line of his body. Lydia perched on the arm of the couch beside her father, one hand on Rob's shoulder in support, and Diane took the chair across from them all, separated by the coffee table that suddenly seemed miles wide. "Where were you?" Rob asked again, and there was accusation beneath the worry. "You just disappeared, wouldn't answer your phone, wouldn't tell anyone where you were going. Do you have any idea how terrifying that was?" "I was remembering who I am," Diane said simply. "Something I should have done years ago." "Mom," Lydia started, her voice gentle. "We understand you're upset about the Patricia thing. Dad explained everything. How it was just a business decision, how he never meant to hurt you, how he's already fixed it. He's trying, Mom. Can't you see that?" Diane looked at her daughter, her beautiful, successful daughter who still believed in fairy tales, where love conquered all and good intentions erased damage. "What exactly did your father explain, Lydia?" "That it was a marketing strategy gone wrong," Lydia said quickly. "That the board pushed for co-CEO structure to signal company evolution, and Patricia was the logical choice because she's been spearheading the new tech division. It wasn't personal, it was business. And when he saw how much it hurt you, he immediately reversed everything. He fired Patricia, he changed the directory back, he even made a public statement taking full responsibility." Diane turned to Rob. "Is that what you told them? That this was all just a misunderstanding?" Rob had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I told them the truth, that I made a terrible mistake, that I didn't consider your feelings, that I was thoughtless and stupid." "But you left out some crucial details," Diane said quietly. "Like the late nights you and Patricia spent working together, the company retreat I wasn't invited to, the intimate photos on your tablet showing how close you two had become, the fact that you were building a partnership with her that used to belong to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus's jaw clenched, and Lydia's hand slipped from her father's shoulder. "There was nothing physical," Rob said desperately. "I swear to you, Diane, I never kissed her, never touched her inappropriately. It was emotional, yes, I won't lie about that. I got caught up in her energy, her ambition, the way she looked at me like I was brilliant instead of just expected. But I never crossed that line. The line was crossed the moment you chose to build intimacy with her instead of maintaining it with me." Diane's voice was steady, calm, though her heart hammered in her chest. "The line was crossed when you started sharing your dreams and goals and daily victories with her, while I got your exhaustion and distraction. The line was crossed when you made her your partner in everything that mattered, while I became just the woman who managed your household." "I know," Rob whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I know, and I'm so sorry. But I'm trying to fix it. I've already scheduled marriage counseling. Dr. Richardson, the therapist Vivian's been seeing, she's supposed to be excellent. And I've restructured my schedule to be home by 6 every night. And I want to take you on that trip to Italy you've been talking about for years. We can renew our vows, start fresh, remember why we fell in love in the first place." It was everything Diane might have wanted to hear a month ago, maybe even a week ago. But now, after a weekend of being truly seen and valued, Rob's promises rang hollow. "When was the last time you asked me about my day?" Diane asked quietly. Rob blinked, confused by the question. "What?" "My day. When was the last time you asked me how I was, what I did, what I was thinking about? Not as a formality while scrolling through your phone, but actually asked and actually listened to. The answer?" Rob opened his mouth, then closed it. His face paled as the realization hit. "I can't remember either," Diane said, answering her own question. "Months at least, maybe longer. You ask what's for dinner, when the dry cleaning will be ready if I remembered to schedule your dental appointment. But you never ask about me, who I am, what I want, what makes me happy." "That's not fair," Rob protested. "I ask about your charity work all the time." "No, you don't." Diane's voice was gentle but firm. "You nod politely when I mention it, but your eyes are always on your phone or your laptop. You've never once asked me what it's like to work with abuse survivors, never asked what fulfills me about that work, never shown genuine interest in the part of my life that has nothing to do with you." "Mom," Lydia interjected, her voice thick with tears, "you're being too hard on him. Marriage is complicated. People get comfortable, they fall into routines. That doesn't mean Dad doesn't love you." "You're right," Diane agreed. "He does love me, in his way. But Lydia, honey, love isn't enough if it doesn't include respect, if it doesn't include partnership, if it doesn't include actually seeing the other person as a complete human being rather than a supporting character in your own story." Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Where were you this weekend, Mom?" The question hung in the air. Rob's head snapped up, sudden fear in his eyes. Lydia looked between them, confusion giving way to dawning understanding. "I was with a friend," Diane said carefully. "An old friend who reminded me what it feels like to be valued, to be seen, to matter." "Oh, God!" Rob's voice came out strangled. "You slept with someone else. That's what this is about. You're trying to justify an affair by making me the villain." "Don't you dare!" Marcus's voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare make this about Mom when you're the one who broke your marriage, when you're the one who chose another woman over your wife, when you're the one who made her feel so invisible she had to find someone who actually saw her." "Marcus," Rob started, but his son cut him off. "No, I'm done pretending this is okay. I've watched you take Mom for granted for years, Dad. I've watched her smile and support you and sacrifice everything while you barely noticed she existed. And now that she finally did something for herself, you want to make her the bad guy? Fuck that." "Marcus, language," Lydia said automatically, but her voice was weak. She was looking at Diane with tears streaming down her face. "Mom, is it true? Were you with someone?" Diane met her daughter's eyes. "Yes. And I'm not sorry?" The words fell like stones into still water, rippling out in expanding circles of consequence. Rob made a sound like he'd been physically struck. Lydia pressed her hand to her mouth, sobbing. But Marcus just nodded, something like pride, flickering across his face. "Good," he said firmly. "You deserve to be happy, Mom. You deserve someone who treats you like you're precious." "She's still my wife," Rob said desperately. "We took vows, Diane, for better or worse, in sickness and health. You promised forever." "So did you," Diane reminded him gently. "And you broke those vows long before I did. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. Every time you chose work over me, every time you forgot I was a woman with needs and not just your support system, every time you looked at Patricia with more interest than you'd shown me in years, you were breaking our vows." "That's not the same thing," Rob protested. "I didn't betray you physically. I didn't give my body to someone else. You gave your emotional intimacy to someone else, which is worse." Diane's voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "You made another woman your confidant, your partner, your priority. You may not have had sex with Patricia, but you absolutely had an affair with her, an emotional affair that lasted months, maybe years. So don't you dare judge me for taking a weekend to remember what it feels like to be desired." The silence that followed was thick with pain and revelation. Lydia was openly crying now, her illusions about her parents' perfect marriage crumbling before her eyes. Marcus had moved to stand beside Diane's chair, one hand on her shoulder in solidarity. Rob looked between his children, seeing for the first time, perhaps, how his actions had affected everyone, not just his wife. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Tell me how to fix this, Diane. I'll do anything." "I want you to let me go," Diane said softly. The words hurt to say, but they also brought a strange sense of relief. "I want you to acknowledge that our marriage has been dying for years, and that trying to resuscitate it now is just prolonging the inevitable." "No," Rob stood abruptly, pacing the room. "No, I won't accept that. We've been together for 32 years, Diane. You can't just throw that away because of one weekend with some other man. We have history, we have children, we have a life together." "We have a history," Diane agreed. "But we don't have a life together anymore, Rob. We have parallel lives that occasionally intersect for holidays and family dinners. When was the last time we actually talked, really talked, about something meaningful? When was the last time we made love because we wanted each other, not just because it had been a while and we should? When was the last time you looked at me and felt lucky that I was yours?" Rob opened his mouth, but no answer came. Because there was no answer. They both knew it. "I don't want to hurt you," Diane continued, her voice gentle despite the devastating words. "But I also can't keep sacrificing my happiness for your comfort. I'm 58 years old, Rob. If I'm lucky, I might have another 30 years. And I don't want to spend them being invisible." "Who is he?" Rob demanded suddenly. "This friend who's so much better than me, who makes you feel so special, who is he?" "That doesn't matter." "It matters to me," Rob's voice rose, desperation giving way to anger. "You're my wife, and you slept with another man. I deserve to know who." "James Cooper," Diane said quietly. "Sarah's husband, my friend from high school." Rob's face went through a series of emotions, confusion, recognition, then fury. "The widow? Jesus, Diane, his wife just died. You're both just rebounding from loss. This isn't real." "Don't," Marcus warned, his voice dangerous. "Don't diminish what Mom feels just because you can't handle losing her." "She's my wife. She's her own person," Marcus exploded. "That's what you've never understood, Dad. Mom isn't an extension of you. She's not just Mrs. Robert Marshall, your support system and household manager. She's Diane. She's a woman who gave up her dreams to support yours, who sacrificed her career to raise us, who spent 32 years making your life easier while you barely noticed she was fading away. And now that she's finally choosing herself over you, you want to make it about your feelings, about your loss? Fuck that." "Marcus, stop," Lydia begged. "This isn't helping. We're a family. We should be trying to work through this together, not—" "We are working through it," Marcus interrupted, "by finally being honest about what's been broken for years, by acknowledging that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let something die with dignity rather than forcing it to limp along just because change is scary." Lydia turned to Diane, her face wet with tears. "Mom, please. I know Dad messed up. I know he hurt you. But 32 years. That has to count for something. You can't just give up without even trying counseling, without giving him a real chance to change." "I've been giving him chances to change for years," Diane said gently, her heart breaking at the pain in her daughter's voice. "Every time I mentioned feeling lonely, every time I asked him to prioritize our marriage, every time I tried to talk about us instead of just logistics, those were chances. And nothing ever actually changed." "Because you never told me it was this bad," Rob said desperately. "If I'd known you were this unhappy—" "You should have known," the words burst from Diane with sudden force. "You should have noticed when your wife stopped smiling genuinely, when she stopped reaching for you in bed, when she started spending all her time volunteering because at least there she felt valued. You should have seen, Rob. That's what partnership means, paying attention, staying connected, noticing when the person you love is drowning." Rob sank back onto the couch, his face in his hands. "I don't know how to lose you. I don't know who I am without you." And there it was, the crux of the problem. After 32 years, Rob didn't know who he was without Diane, managing his life, supporting his career, making everything easier. He loved her, yes, but he loved what she did for him even more. That's exactly why we need to end this, Diane said softly. We've both lost ourselves in this marriage. You need to figure out who Robert Marshall is when he's not dependent on me. And I need to remember who Diane Marshall is when she's not defined by being your wife. So that's it? Rob's voice was hollow. You're just done? You're choosing him over me? I'm choosing me, Diane corrected. For the first time in 32 years, I'm choosing what I want over what everyone else needs. And yes, that includes choosing to explore something with James. But even if James wasn't in the picture, this would still be the right decision. Our marriage has been over for a while now. We've both just been too comfortable or too scared to admit it. Lydia stood abruptly, shaking her head. I can't do this. I can't sit here and watch our family fall apart and pretend it's okay. She looked at Diane with an expression that mixed love and betrayal. I know you're hurting, Mom. I know Dad messed up badly. But how could you do this? How could you give up on us? I'm not giving up on you, Diane said, standing to approach her daughter. I will always be your mother, always love you, always be here for you. But Lydia, I can't stay in a marriage that's killing me slowly just to maintain the illusion of an intact family. That's not fair to me, and it's not fair to your father either. We both deserve a chance at genuine happiness. Lydia pulled away from Diane's attempted embrace. I need air. I need to think. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, pausing only to look back at her mother. I hope he's worth it, Mom. I really do. Because you're destroying a family for him. The door closed behind her with finality. The silence left in her wake was oppressive, heavy with grief and change and the death of things that had seemed eternal. She'll come around, Marcus said quietly. She's just shocked. She always idealized your marriage, thought it was some perfect love story. This is shattering her worldview. I know, Diane whispered, tears finally falling. I never wanted to hurt her, to hurt any of you. You didn't hurt us, Marcus said firmly. Dad did that when he took you for granted. You're just refusing to accept that treatment anymore. There's a difference. Rob looked up, his face ravaged by tears. What happens now? Now we separate, Diane said, surprised by how steady her voice was. You'll move out. I'll keep the house since we raised the kids here. We'll file for divorce quietly, try to avoid unnecessary drama. We'll be fair in the settlement. I'm not interested in punishment, Rob, just freedom. How can you be so calm about this? Rob asked, something like awe mixing with his grief. How can you just end us? Because I've been mourning this marriage for years, Diane admitted. You're just now realizing it's dead. I've had time to make peace with it. Marcus squeezed Diane's shoulder. I'm proud of you, Mom. I know that probably doesn't help right now, but I want you to know. I see how brave this is, how hard, and I support you completely. Thank you, baby. Diane covered her son's hand with her own. That means everything. Rob stood slowly, looking around the living room as if seeing it for the first time. I'll pack some things, move to the condo downtown until we figure out permanent arrangements. He looked at Diane, and for a moment, she saw the boy she'd fallen in love with at 24, vulnerable, hopeful, reaching for something he couldn't quite grasp. For what it's worth, I really am sorry, and I really do love you. I know you do, Diane said gently. In your way. But your way was never enough, Rob, and it took me 32 years to accept that. Over the next week, the reality of separation set in. Rob moved his belongings to the downtown condo, the process of dismantling 32 years of shared life, both agonizing and strangely relieving. They were civil, even kind to each other, like mourners at a funeral, treating each other with the careful courtesy of shared grief. Lydia wasn't speaking to Diane, communicating only through Marcus or terse text messages about logistics. It hurt more than Diane had anticipated, but she understood. Her daughter needed time to process, to reconcile the mother she thought she knew with this woman who'd chosen herself over family obligation. Marcus visited daily, bringing groceries and company and unwavering support. She'll come around, he kept saying. She just needs to see that you're happier, that this was the right choice. But was she happier? Diane spent her days sorting through the detritus of her marriage, photos, mementos, proof of 3 decades of building a life together. Some items went to Rob, some she kept, Some she simply threw away. Each decision felt monumental and meaningless all at once. James called every evening, his voice a lifeline in the chaos. "How are you holding up?" "I don't know," Diane admitted during one such call. "Sometimes I feel free, like I can finally breathe. Other times I feel guilty, like I'm the villain who destroyed a family for selfish reasons." "You're not a villain," James said firmly. "You're a woman who finally chose herself after decades of self-sacrifice. There's nothing villainous about that." "Lydia thinks there is." "Lydia is grieving the loss of her illusions. But she loves you, Diane. She'll realize eventually that happy parents, even divorced ones, are better than miserable parents pretending for appearances." Diane wanted to believe him, but the ache of her daughter's rejection was a physical pain in her chest. Friday evening, exactly 1 week after the confrontation, Diane's doorbell rang. She opened it to find Lydia standing on the porch, her face blotchy from crying, her arms wrapped around herself. "Can I come in?" Lydia's voice was small, vulnerable. "Of course." Diane stepped aside, following her daughter into the living room where everything had changed a week ago. They sat in silence for several minutes, the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, Lydia spoke. "I talked to Dad. Really talked to him for the first time maybe ever." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I asked him when he last took you on a date, when he last asked about your volunteer work, when he last made you feel special rather than just useful." Diane waited, letting her daughter process. "He couldn't answer," Lydia continued, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Any of it. He couldn't remember the last time he did any of those things, and I realized—" Her voice broke. "I realized I was asking you to stay in a marriage where you weren't valued just so I could keep believing in fairy tales." "Oh, honey." Diane moved to the couch, pulling her daughter into her arms. "You're not responsible for my choices. I'm the one who stayed too long, who accepted being treated as less than I deserved." "But you shouldn't have had to," Lydia sobbed against her mother's shoulder. "You gave up everything for us, for Dad, and we all just let you. We took and never once asked what you needed in return. You were children. It was my job to take care of you." "But Dad wasn't a child," Lydia said fiercely, pulling back to meet Diane's eyes. "Dad was supposed to be your partner, and he failed you. For years he failed you. And I was so busy wanting you to stay that I didn't stop to think about whether you should stay." Diane cupped her daughter's face, wiping away tears with her thumbs. "I need you to understand something, Lydia. My leaving your father isn't about James, not really. James just reminded me that I deserve to be seen, to be valued, to matter. But even if I never saw James again, I'd still be divorcing your father, because I can't live the rest of my life being invisible." "I see you, Mom," Lydia whispered. "I'm sorry it took this to make me realize how much you've sacrificed, how little we appreciated it. I see you now." They held each other and cried, for the family they'd been, for the illusions that had shattered, for the pain of growth and change and choosing authenticity over comfort. When the tears finally subsided, Lydia pulled back with a watery smile. "Tell me about him, about James. If you're going to blow up your life for someone, I want to know he's worth it." So Diane told her. About James in high school, the road not taken. About reconnecting at Sarah's funeral, the immediate sense of recognition. About the lake house weekend, feeling desired and seen for the first time in years. About how James asked what she needed, what she wanted, what brought her joy. Questions Rob had stopped asking decades ago. "He sounds wonderful," Lydia said quietly when Diane finished. "Scary wonderful, like the kind of person who could actually make you happy." "He could," Diane agreed. "If I let him. If I'm brave enough to risk loving again." "You've always been brave, Mom. You just showed your bravery through sacrifice instead of rebellion. Maybe it's time to be a different kind of brave." That weekend, James came to Connecticut. Diane had invited him for dinner, wanting to see him in her space, in her real life outside the bubble of the lake house. Marcus joined them, as did, surprisingly, Lydia. James brought flowers for Diane and wine for the table, greeting her with a kiss that was tender, but not overtly sexual in front of her children. Diane appreciated the discretion, the awareness that this was complicated, that her children were processing. Dinner conversation was surprisingly easy. James asked Marcus about his architecture projects, showing genuine interest in the sustainable design principles her son was passionate about. He asked Lydia about pediatric medicine, laughing at her stories about difficult parents and adorable patients. He asked about their childhoods, their relationship with their father, their feelings about the separation, treating them as complete people whose opinions mattered. "You're not what I expected," Marcus admitted over dessert. "What did you expect?" James asked, amused. "I don't know. Someone older, maybe? More predatory? Someone taking advantage of Mom's vulnerability?" James laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Fair enough. For what it's worth, your mother is the least vulnerable person I know. She's one of the strongest women I've ever met. She just forgot that for a while." "And you helped her remember," Lydia said, studying James with an intensity that made Diane nervous. "I reminded her that she deserves to be valued," James corrected, "but she did the hard work herself, choosing to leave a comfortable situation for uncertainty. That takes real courage." After dinner, the kids tactfully excused themselves. Marcus hugged Diane tight, whispering, "He's good for you," in her ear. Lydia hugged James, surprising everyone, and said, "Take care of my mom. She deserves someone who sees how special she is." When they were alone, James pulled Diane into his arms on the couch. "Your kids are wonderful. You raised them well." "We raised them well," Diane corrected, then paused. "I mean, Rob and I know what you meant." James kissed her forehead. "You can acknowledge the good parts of your marriage without diminishing why it ended. Rob's not a villain, Diane. He's just a man who took you for granted and didn't realize what he was losing until it was too late." "He wants another chance," Diane admitted. "He's texted me every day this week, apologizing, promising changes, begging for counseling." James tensed slightly but kept his voice even. "Do you want to give him that chance?" "No." The word came without hesitation, and saying it felt like truth. "I don't. Not because I hate him, but because I know nothing would actually change. He'd try, genuinely try for maybe 6 months, a year if I'm lucky. But eventually, he'd fall back into old patterns because that's who he is, and I'd fall back into accepting less than I deserve because that's who I was with him." "And who are you now?" James asked softly. "I don't know yet," Diane admitted. "But I'm excited to find out. For the first time in 32 years, I'm excited about my own future." James smiled, that devastating smile that transformed his whole face. "Can I be part of that future?" "I'm counting on it." Diane kissed him, slow and deep and full of promise. "But James, I need to do this right. I need to actually divorce Rob, not just separate. I need to figure out who I am outside of being anyone's wife. I need time." "I've waited 40 years, James reminded her. "I can wait as long as you need, as long as I know you're choosing me, choosing us." "I am," Diane breathed against his lips. "Every day I choose us." They made love that night in Diane's bed, the bed she'd shared with Rob for 3 decades. It should have felt wrong, transgressive. Instead, it felt like reclamation. This was her space now, her life, her choice. And she was choosing James, choosing passion, choosing to be seen. Afterward, tangled together in the moonlight, James traced patterns on her shoulder. "Come to dinner with me next Friday. Public, a real date where we don't hide. Rob will find out. The divorce isn't even filed yet. People will talk." "Let them," James said firmly. "I'm not ashamed of wanting you, Diane. I'm not hiding what we have. If you're ready, if you're brave enough, let's stop pretending this is just friendship or transition. Let's show the world you've moved on." It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Going public meant burning bridges, making their relationship real and undeniable. It meant facing judgment from people who'd known her as Rob's devoted wife for 3 decades. It meant choosing forward motion over comfortable stasis. "Yes," Diane said, surprising herself. "Yes, let's do it. Let's go to dinner. Let's be seen together. Let's choose each other publicly." James's kiss was answer enough. Passionate, claiming, celebratory. This was happening. They were happening. And Diane was finally brave enough to let herself be happy. Diane made her choice. But is it the right one? What happens next will shock you. Like and subscribe for the powerful conclusion. Chapter 4. 6 months later, Diane barely recognized her own life. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks ago, surprisingly amicable despite the emotional devastation. Rob had been generous in the settlement, whether from genuine remorse or just wanting it over quickly, Diane didn't know. She kept the house, received a substantial portion of the company's value, and maintained her financial security. Rob had actually changed, though not in the way he'd hoped. He'd started therapy, genuinely addressing the patterns that had destroyed their marriage. He'd even sent Diane a letter, not begging for reconciliation, but apologizing with real understanding of what he'd done wrong. "I took you for granted," he'd written. "I let you fade into the background of my life and convinced myself that was normal, that it was what marriage became after decades. But you were right. We both deserved better. I hope you found it. I hope he makes you feel valued every single day, and I hope, eventually, you can forgive me." Diane had cried reading it, but they were cleansing tears. Closure tears. She'd written back, wishing him genuine happiness, thanking him for the good years they'd had before things broke. They'd never be friends, probably, but they could be civil co-parents who'd once loved each other and now just wanted the best for their respective futures. Marcus had thrived in the aftermath, his relationship with his father actually improving now that they weren't pretending everything was fine. Lydia had taken longer, but she'd come around, especially after seeing Diane bloom in the months following separation. Because Diane had bloomed, she'd accepted the position as Executive Director of Women Empowered, a foundation supporting women over 50 in transition, exactly the kind of work she'd abandoned 32 years ago. She was making a real difference again, helping women rediscover their worth and potential after divorce, widowhood, or just decades of self-sacrifice. And James. God, James was a revelation. He'd moved to Connecticut 2 months ago, buying a beautiful brownstone in the city rather than assuming he should move into Diane's house. "We need to build something new together," he'd insisted, "not just move into the space Rob left behind." They spent weekends at his lake house and weekdays navigating their new relationship in the real world. It wasn't always easy. They were both set in their ways, both carrying baggage from previous marriages, both learning to be partners rather than performing roles. But it was real. It was honest. And it was built on mutual respect and genuine desire to know each other fully. Tonight was Diane's first major fundraiser as executive director, a gala celebrating women who'd rebuilt their lives after loss. She'd been working on it for months, and the turnout was spectacular. Over 300 attendees, including several prominent donors and even a few celebrities who'd gone through public divorces. Diane stood at the podium, looking out over the crowd. James sat at the front table, his eyes locked on her with pride and love. Beside him were Marcus and Lydia, both beaming. Even Rob had sent a substantial donation with a note, "Proud of you for following your passion. Better late than never." "Thank you all for coming tonight," Diane began, her voice steady and strong. Women Empowered was founded on a simple principle. It's never too late to choose yourself. Never too late to pursue your dreams. Never too late to remember that you are valuable, powerful, and deserving of love that sees and celebrates you. She paused, making eye contact around the room. "I spent 32 years supporting someone else's dreams while my own gathered dust. I told myself that was what love looked like, what sacrifice meant, what being a good wife required. And maybe it was, for a time. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that partnership means both people matter equally, that supporting someone shouldn't mean erasing yourself." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Diane saw women nodding, tears streaming down some faces. 6 months ago, I made the hardest decision of my life. I chose to leave a marriage that was suffocating me slowly. I chose uncertainty over comfortable misery. I chose to rediscover who Diane Marshall could be when she wasn't just someone's wife, someone's support system, someone's background character. Diane's eyes found James, who was watching her with such love. It took her breath away. "And you know what I discovered? I discovered that I was passionate about helping women rebuild their lives. I discovered that I had wisdom and experience and empathy to offer. I discovered that at 58 years old, I could start over. I could fall in love again. I could choose happiness over obligation. I discovered that it's never, ever too late. The applause was thunderous. Diane saw women standing, some crying openly, some smiling with fierce determination. These were her people, women who'd lost themselves and were fighting to find their way back. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations, stories shared, connections made. Diane felt energized rather than drained, fed by the purposeful work rather than depleted by it. As the crowd thinned, James appeared at her elbow with champagne and that smile that still made her pulse quicken. "You were magnificent up there. Truly magnificent." "I meant every word," Diane said, accepting the glass and the kiss he pressed to her temple. "I know you did. That's what made it so powerful." James's hand settled at her lower back, possessive and protective, in a way that made her feel cherished rather than owned. "Ready to get out of here? I have something I want to show you." Diane raised an eyebrow. "Something you want to show me?" That sounds suspiciously like a line. James laughed, that rich sound she'd come to love. "Not a line, a surprise. Trust me? Always." They said their goodbyes to Marcus and Lydia, both of whom hugged Diane fiercely and told her how proud they were. Then James was leading her out to his car, driving with mysterious secrecy toward somewhere he wouldn't reveal. "Are you kidnapping me?" Diane teased as they left the city behind. "Absolutely. I've been planning this abduction for weeks." James grinned, reaching over to take her hand. "Just trust me. Please." Diane settled back in her seat, content to let him surprise her. This was one of the things she loved about being with James, the element of surprise, the thoughtfulness, the way he actually planned. Things meant to bring her joy rather than assuming she'd be happy with whatever scraps of attention he had left over. The drive took about an hour, and Diane's breath caught when she recognized where they were going. Vermont. The covered bridge where they'd... "James." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What are we doing here?" James pulled to a stop near the bridge, the same one from their previous visit. He turned to face her, and in the moonlight, she could see nervousness mixing with determination on his face. "6 months ago, you took the biggest risk of your life. You chose yourself, chose us, chose to believe that happiness was possible even after decades of settling for less." James took her hands, his grip warm and steady. "You've spent these months rebuilding your life, rediscovering your purpose, becoming the woman you were always meant to be. And I've watched you bloom into someone even more magnificent than I remembered." "James, let me finish," he said gently. "Please." Diane nodded, her heart hammering in her chest. "I don't want to rush you. God knows we're both old enough to know that timing matters, that healing takes time, that building something real requires patience." James reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "But I also know that I've waited 40 years to be with you, and I don't want to waste another moment pretending I'm not completely, desperately in love with you." He opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring, not a diamond, but a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, deep blue like the lake where they'd first reconnected. "This isn't an engagement ring," James clarified quickly. "I know you just got divorced, that you're still figuring out who you are outside of marriage, that the last thing you probably want is to jump into another one. But this is a promise ring, a commitment ring. I choose you every single day, and I'll wait as long as you need ring." Tears streamed down Diane's face. "James, marry me," he said softly. "Not now, not even soon, but someday, when you're ready, when you've fully healed and rebuilt and remembered who you are. Marry me. Let me be the man who celebrates you instead of taking you for granted. Let me be the partner who sees you, who values you, who makes you feel chosen every single day." Diane couldn't speak. Her throat was too tight, her heart too full. This beautiful man, offering her everything she had ever wanted, but in a way that respected her journey, her healing, her need to be whole on her own first. "And if someday never comes," James continued, his voice thick with emotion, "if you decide you never want to marry again, that's okay too. I'll still be here, still choosing you, still loving you. This ring is just a symbol that I'm all in, Diane, for however long you'll have me, in whatever form you need me." Yes, Diane whispered, then louder. Yes. Someday. When I'm ready? Yes. James's smile was incandescent. He slid the ring onto her right hand, not her left, not a replacement for her wedding rings, but something new and entirely theirs. Then he was kissing her, deep and passionate and full of promise. They made love in the back of his car like teenagers, laughing at the awkwardness of it, the cramped space, the sheer joy of being together. It was silly and imperfect and absolutely perfect. Afterward, tangled together in the moonlight, James traced the ring on her finger. No pressure on timing. I mean that. I know you do, Diane said, pressing a kiss to his jaw. That's why my answer is yes. Because you see me, all of me, and love me anyway. Because you want me to be whole and healed and certain. Because you're willing to wait for me to be ready rather than rushing me into something before I can stand on my own. You're already standing on your own, James pointed out. You're magnificent on your own. I just want to stand beside you. Beside me, Diane repeated, tasting the words. Not ahead of me, not behind me. Beside me. Always beside you, James confirmed. Partners, equals, two whole people choosing to build something together rather than one person sacrificing for the other. It was everything Diane hadn't known she needed to hear, everything her marriage to Rob had never been. 6 months, she said suddenly. Give me 6 more months to fully settle into my new life, my new work, my new self. And then? James's voice was hopeful, excited. Then let's get married. Small ceremony, just us and the kids and a few close friends. Nothing fancy, nothing performative. Just 2 people who've waited long enough choosing each other officially. James pulled her impossibly closer. 6 months. I can do 6 months. Hell, I can do 6 years if that's what you need. 6 months, Diane repeated firmly. I've spent enough of my life waiting for someday. I want to start our forever sooner rather than later. They sealed the promise with a kiss, tender and deep and full of all the tomorrows stretching before them. Epilogue, 1 year later. The covered bridge in Vermont was decorated with simple white flowers and autumn leaves. No grand ceremony, no hundreds of guests, no pressure to perform for an audience. Just Diane and James, Marcus and Lydia and James's children, a handful of close friends, and an officiant who specialized in second-chance weddings. Diane wore a cream dress, elegant, age-appropriate, stunning. Her silver hair was styled in loose waves, and the sapphire ring James had given her a year ago sparkled on her right hand. Soon, she'd add a wedding band to her left. James stood at the altar in a perfectly tailored suit, his eyes locked on her as she walked toward him without anyone giving her away. Because she wasn't being given, she was choosing, freely and fully, to join her life with his. The vows they'd written themselves. I choose you, Diane said, her voice steady despite her tears. Not because I need you to complete me. I'm all ready. Complete. Not because I'm afraid to be alone. I've learned to be gloriously alone. But because you see me, value me, celebrate me. Because you make me want to be better while loving exactly who I am right now. Because with you, I'm not just existing. I'm truly living. James's vows were equally powerful. I've loved you for 40 years, but I love you most right now. Not the girl you were, not the woman you might become, but exactly who you are in this moment. You're strong and vulnerable, confident and uncertain, perfectly imperfect. You've taught me that real love doesn't demand sacrifice, it celebrates partnership, that choosing each other daily is more powerful than any one-time promise. I choose you, Diane. Today, tomorrow, every day we're given. When the officiant pronounced them married, James kissed her with the passion of a man who'd waited decades for this moment. The small gathering erupted in cheers and tears. Marcus hugged his mother fiercely, whispering, "You're glowing, Mom. This is what happiness looks like on you." Lydia cried through her congratulations, admitting, "I was wrong to want you to stay with Dad. This, what you have with James, this is what love should look like. Thank you for teaching me that." Even Rob had sent a gift, a framed photo of Diane from their early years with a note. Remember her? She was always in there, just waiting to bloom again. Congratulations on finding someone who waters your roots. The reception was small and intimate, held at a nearby inn. No formal dances or toasts or performative traditions. Just food and conversation and celebration of two people who'd found their way to each other after decades of detours. As the evening wound down, James took Diane's hand and led her to the inn's garden. Fairy lights twinkled overhead, and music drifted from the reception. "How are you?" he asked, pulling her close. "Regretting anything?" Not for a second. Diane went up on her toes to kiss him. "This is perfect. You're perfect. We're perfect. We're messy and complicated and figuring it out as we go," James corrected with a smile. "But yeah, it's pretty damn perfect." They swayed together in the garden, and Diane thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain of realizing her marriage was dead, the courage to leave, the fear and uncertainty of starting over at 58, the joy of rediscovering herself, the wonder of being loved by someone who actually saw her. "What are you thinking?" James murmured against her hair. "That it's never too late," Diane said softly. "Never too late to choose yourself, to start over, to find love that celebrates you rather than diminishes you. Never too late to bloom." "You were always blooming," James said. "You just needed better soil." Diane laughed, the sound full of joy and freedom and hope for all the tomorrows stretching before them. "Ready for our next chapter?" James tightened his arms around her. "With you? Always." They stayed in the garden until the stars came out, two people who'd waited a lifetime to find their way home to each other, and in each other's arms they were finally, completely, perfectly home. Thank you for following Diane's journey. If you loved this story of second chances and choosing yourself, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment telling me what moment resonated most with you. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message that it's never too late to choose happiness, share this story with them. See you in the next one.